Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to a brand new edition of Vestiges After Dark. I am your host, Bishop Brian Willett, coming to you live from the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains on this April 26, 2019. And we've got a great show for you tonight. I am really excited to present to you special guest, Darren Evans. You know him from Ghost Adventures and several other shows out there. He is the Ouija board guy, and we're going to be talking about Ouija boards, the potential dangers, their use, all of that. Don't go away. You're not going to want to miss the next 2 hours. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Hopefully you can hear me well. I know that there have been multiple sound issues over the past several episodes, and I think we finally, hopefully, I pray that we have it worked out. The Spreaker system is very strange when it's working with Skype. If I don't use Skype, it works perfectly, like clockwork. But when we bring in the Skype integration, and we've got 3 people on Skype tonight, that's when we have seems to have issues, and it distorts the way the Spreaker system monitors the sound, because there are natural recording level adjustments that it makes, but for some reason when the integration goes in, it all goes to hell. So we're going to make it work, but I'm glad that everyone so far in the chat room is reporting that the sound is good, and I want to give a big shout out to all of you. Thank you for joining us for this live broadcast. I think you're really going to like tonight's episode. It's really a pleasure, and I can't really say it enough, to bring Darren Evans on this show tonight, because he is a great guy. I got to meet him for the first time out in Las Vegas for Ghost Adventures Live, and he, Sister Mary Joan, Patty Negri, and myself went to a Chinese restaurant at the Golden Nugget. And I'll tell you, we had a great day. It was late at night. We're eating, Chinese duck. The restaurant had closed, but they just left us alone and didn't bother us. And we stayed. We probably overstayed our welcome, but they were too polite to ask us to leave. But it was a really wonderful occasion, and I hope that we can bring a little bit of that experience to tonight's broadcast. I don't like scripts and I don't like outlines unless I'm teaching something. But this show is supposed to be fun, so I want you all to have fun and enjoy the conversation. I have no idea where or what direction we're going to go tonight, but I can tell you it's going to be interesting. So without any further delay, let's go ahead and bring everybody on. So Sister Mary Joan, are you with us tonight?
I am. Good evening, everyone. We're in for a treat tonight.
Awesome. And Sister Maximilian, you there? You monitoring the chat room?
I'm here. Good evening.
Awesome. And without any delays, let's go ahead and bring on our special guest, Darren Evans. How are you tonight, Darren?
Brian, doing good. I thought you were going to cue the Ozzy Osbourne music. We're gonna take a ride on the crazy train tonight.
Well, I would have, but I saw that you cut your hair, so I'm not sure it applies anymore.
Well, it's always been cut. I did the same cut for 20 years, Brian, and it's when I let it down, it's really down, and when I let it up, it's way up there. So it just depends on my mood. And what's funny is you're talking about that going in the Chinese restaurant. Here I walk up to Mary, haven't got quite out of the Ozzy Osbourne look, and she looks up and she says, "Well, Ozzy, an exorcist, a witch, and a nun walk into a bar."
Yep.
That's exactly
right.
the way it was. Yeah, it was fantastic. What a great night that was, wasn't it?
It was a great night,
Oh, yeah.
and the way that whole show came down was just meeting everyone was an incredible experience. Since then, I've got to know Gary Galka a little bit better. He heard about I've had some losses with my brother and a best
Yeah.
friend that I've lost recently,
Yeah.
and Gary reached out and sent me an SB7 for free, and just sent it just such a heartfelt expression of his heart. And then I've met Josh down here at the Vegas ghost tour, creepyvegas.com. He's got that. We went on the ghost tour. We went out that night. We talked about some of his projects that he's got going on. So meeting you, Sister Mary, Gary Galka, the Perrys, I already knew Justin Spurrier, and then since then, he's been hired as equipment manager for Ghost Adventures. How cool is
Yep.
that?
It really is fantastic, and it's really created a nice, I don't know, I mean, people refer to us on Twitter as the Ghost Adventures family. I guess we're kind of like the extended family. And, we really all do get along very well, all of us. So it's nice to be able to communicate like this and to, be able to depend upon each other's specialization and expertise in the field of the paranormal research. It really is a wonderful thing that Zach did in bringing us all together like this.
It really was, and what a show, with the recent developments with the Crescent. I'm from Oklahoma, and the Crescent, hotel in Arkansas, that they just did an investigation with, and now, some of these body parts were uncovered days after the investigation. I think it leads a lot of validation to what these guys do. And so many people just aren't aware of the camaraderie that exists, in this Ghost Adventures family. Brian, you've been a part of those hugs before we go in, the fist bump and the football huddle with Aaron and Zach. Those emotions and that excitement. There's a reason why it's the number one paranormal rated show in the country, is because they express their emotion.
Yeah.
They treat people like family, and they always have me in multiple episodes, and I can't thank them guys enough for what they've, the generosity and the compassion they've showed me, knowing what I've gone through.
Yeah.
And so it's just been great meeting everybody. And yes, we are like a family, and it really shows in the way we communicate and the way we continue to try to help other people.
Oh yeah, no question about that. And I think that is one of the things that distinguishes Ghost Adventures from the other shows is its drive towards authenticity, and it's not afraid to, basically show what it really is like. Because I tell people all the time, they ask me, what's it like? I'm sure they ask you too. What's it like to be behind the scenes with Zach and the GAC, and I tell them it's just like it is on camera. What you see is what you get. There's really no mystery to it. There's no persona that is put on. These are very authentic guys, and they are just like they are on television. There's no real distinction there, and I think that just plays into the whole drive for authenticity that Zach and the rest of the GAC put into the show. So it's my favorite show. It always has been my favorite show. It's really kind of funny because of all the paranormal shows out there, and there's so many now. For the one to call on me, it happened to be the only one that I watched because I never really watched any of the other. I'm not a big paranormal junkie. I think people think that I am. I'm really not. But I always loved Ghost Adventures. I really always enjoyed that show. So I would tune in every week, at least as often as I could. And if I didn't catch it, the DVR would, and I would catch up on some point in the future and watch them all. So I've seen every episode of Ghost Adventures, but it's the only paranormal show that I can say that about. And I'm honored to have been a part of it now, in such a big way. And I'm sure you understand that.
Yeah, I do, Brian. It's, when I watch them guys work, their knowledge of their gadgetry, again, the camaraderie they show as brothers, it really comes off, and it comes off on screen. Zach cares about his people, and yes, it is controversial, and yes, it is entertainment, and so of all the shows that I've ever been a part of, they are able to kind of create a balance between, because it's hard to please everybody. Yeah. There are so many shows, there's so many new shows that are coming out, but hats off to Ghost Adventures. They start, I think they come out in 2007 with that documentary. I came out in the public eye in 2008, so I've been able to see Zach and the guys grow into what they've become. Yeah. And with Aaron being an artist, and I'm an artist myself, and just we have things in common. We share a synchronicity, and I've always stuck up for them guys because they've always stuck up for me, and it's just great. And there's a lot of cool things on the horizon, in paranormal TV. I just finished a very cool investigation of a haunted doll, Norman the Haunted Doll, and we went to Virginia and we did an investigation for the. Comes out in June on the Travel Channel. It's the show A Haunting. Okay. And so we got that coming out in June. As far as to paranormal TV, I think they're one of the higher rated paranormal shows too. And as you know, there's a lot of shows that have drifted over to the Travel Channel. Yeah. And I feel it's cool that I'm on Ghost Adventures, which is a Travel Channel show. We got the Haunting episode coming out in June, which is on the Travel Channel as well. I've been working with producers on a new show that's coming out, and we're filming a pilot next week. And it's all hush-hush, but it's I'm pleased to announce that with you, Brian, that we've got a lot of cool things going on the horizon.
That is fantastic. I'm so happy for you, I mean, that is really such a great thing to be, we're going to get more Darren Evans on travel. That's just going to be awesome. Because you're talking about how, you're a big fan of me, of mine. I mean, I'm a huge fan of yours. I loved your episode. The first one you did for Ghost Adventures there, and it really fascinated me, and we're going to get into some of that, particularly Ouija boards and your particular views on them. And I know that we talked a little bit about that at dinner that night at the Golden Nugget, so I sort of have a preview in my mind of what you're going to say, but there's no limits on this show. There's no, you have nobody to please except yourself, so take it as deep or as dark as you want to, but before you do, I just want to say congratulations. And why don't you announce to everybody who might not know why congratulations is in order tonight?
Well, not only for, continued involvement in doing what I do and doing what you do, having the chance to tell my story and with my experiences that's coming up, on the Travel Channel. That's all I can say about that. But more importantly, I've been with this woman for 2 years. Her name's Danae. She's the best thing that's ever happened to me in my life. And we announced today on Facebook that we're going to have a baby boy.
Awesome.
And
so,
that's
just awesome.
We went and got the ultrasound done today, Brian, in complete 3D.
Oh, awesome.
And got all these pictures God bless the kid. He looks just like his daddy. So
you got a little Aussie in there.
God
right?
help us. We got another Aussie coming out, and so it's just, of all people that you're going to be resemble in life. I've had to go through that in my life. That's another tragedy. But anyway, I'm very pleased to announce that. I'm excited as I can be, and it's wonderful life. It's the circle of life. Having just lost a brother and a best friend, that circle of life comes true, and to bring another one into this fold is just going to be it's going to be magical, and so I'm very pleased to announce that, and life is good.
Yeah, well, sounds like God's got some good things in store for you, my friend. Definitely. Mm-hmm. But let's go ahead, and I think obviously, the audience really knows you from your experience with Ouija boards. You were brought into the Ghost Adventures Live episode with that intention in mind. So let's, I guess, start off with how did you get involved with Ouija boards? How did you become, get to the point where you would become an expert in this particular area of metaphysical research?
Well, I don't know that expert would be the right word, Brian, but I get your drift, because no one really knows what goes on when you play this device, this talking board, this oracle. A lot of people are of the, opinion that it's just a tool, and I would agree. However, I was asked to perform a lecture at WouijaCon in 2015 on my experiences, and it basically was a celebration, the 125th celebration of the Ouija board, which is great. I don't, I've always been fascinated by boards. In the mid '80s, there was a double-sided board that was found underneath a house that belonged to my girlfriend who lived across the street from my grandmother. I was about 14, 15 years old, and this was a very grisly-looking work of art. Mm-hmm. Double-sided. On one side was a standard William Fold talking board, but it was the other side that had all these weird engravings and markings. It was just a sight to behold, and we were told not to mess with it. But, of course, being teenagers, we began to have sessions on this board. And the house was already rumored to be haunted before the board was even found. And what made things even more mysterious, the board was found with weird-looking lightning jars surrounding the board I remember getting one of the jars out and it had this weird white chalky substance on the outside of them. I had no idea what was going to be inside this, and I remember holding it up to the sun and seeing the red blood at the bottom of this thing and thinking, what in the hell is this? Yeah. Well, there were preserved blackbirds surrounding this board, and so nobody knew how it had gotten there or what it was, and so that's where my involvement began, and there's a lot of controversy about people saying that I fabricated the Zozo phenomenon, okay? Because there's a couple of reasons why they say that. And one of the reasons is it's no secret that I was a Led Zeppelin fan back then. I am now. Right. And on the Zeppelin 4 album, Jimmy Page had adopted a sigil that was Zoso, Z-O-S-O. And there was a lot of controversy. He's never come out publicly to explain the reason why he adopted this. And then, later on, 20 years later, I found out that the word Zozo in the ancient Basque language actually means blackbird or crow. And so I didn't realize that when we had found the board that there would be that kind of connection. But I'd also found months later, I found another jar on a job site in Sand Springs, Oklahoma. We were doing a remodel job, and we had to dig up about 10 feet in the ground for a water main, and I found another jar that looked just like it, that had a preserved blackbird in it. And so there's always been that connection, with the ominous ravens, reputation, of the whole lore, Ravenology, the whole, the whole esotericism of that, And so, but getting back to where it started, we began to have sessions on this board, and weird things would happen. It would, the creepy thing is if we didn't want to use that really ugly side because it just looked evil on that side. I didn't know what the symbols were. And so we would play on the other side, and it was the first time I ever used a board, and the planchet would scoot on. We were using a cassette tape. We didn't have a real planchet for it, and so we just used whatever we could, but it would often go off the board and then push the board off the table in the kitchen, and it would often land on what we eventually started calling it the dark side of that board. And so it was like it wanted us to talk on that side of it, and so we actually started sessions on the other side. And it was just, it started going back from Z to O, Z to what I would eventually, nickname the rainbow effect. Mm-hmm. And that's how it would announce itself. And that's, years later when the internet came out, and I started, doing my own research on Ouija boards and people's experiences. I was, it was sometime in 2006, 2007, I began to see reports of other people having the same kind of experience with this particular entity naming itself, and then the bizarre, strange paranormal things that would happen after it surfaced. And so to me, it was kind of relieving back at the time because I had a couple of nervous breakdowns when I became so obsessed with the board. It was just a crazy thing. I mean, I was so obsessed with it at one point in my life that I developed powerful shoulder muscles just from constantly using the board with people like a musical chairs. And I didn't use it by myself. I couldn't get it to work as good. But I became the guy that if you didn't believe in the spirit realm, back in the Tulsa area, me and my ex-wife, we would bring our little mortar pestle and our little our dirt bag with us, because we thought that, we'd done a little research by that time, but there was few people that I didn't totally convince that there was such thing as the spirit realm, and there was a lot of weird things that happened, strange events that surrounded those sessions, which was an obsession, led to a nervous breakdown, where I thought demons were actually chasing me in human form. And so, I wrote a book with Rosemary Ellen Guiley as the co-author, and anybody that's interested, you only got 2 hours or whatever, but in this book I describe a lot of those early sessions, with friends. A friend of mine named Randy was a very popular football player back in school. We had, he asked it one night how he was going to die, and it spelled car wreck at night. And it was 2 years later, my friend Randy, was found dead. He hit a telephone pole on Wakairo Road out in Sand Springs. He died exactly as it was forecasted on the Ouija board. Another friend, Mike Silver, he was the best man at my first wedding. He told him, he asked it how he was going to die one night, and it spelled murder. He indeed was murdered. His death remains an unsolved murder in Collinsville, Oklahoma. That was the best. Those were two of my best friends right there. And so when I found out that other people were having these experiences, I knew that I wasn't crazy, Brian. That this stuff was for real, and I began my quest to document other people's experiences with Ouija boards, and that's and here we are today, and this phenomenon is just evolved into something that no one could have ever predicted. With thousands of videos on YouTube, there's been, it goes on and on. Not Scary Farm had a virtual reality Zozo attraction for Halloween. The commercialization of it is disturbing, but the psychology, it always gets back to this controversial Ouija board. I'm not very well liked by the proponents of Ouija, I'll be honest with you. I mean, when I gave that lecture at WouijaCon, you could have heard a pin drop in that audience, because I was the last one to speak, and I said, hey guys, this ain't all peaches and cream here when it comes to Ouija boards. Let's not pretend ourselves. And so I've always been a guy, Brian, I tell it like it is. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, man, but I'm smart enough to know what I've experienced. And then when thousands of other people, well, I'm going to say hundreds of other people have shared with me their experiences. A lot of those, or some of them, are in my book, but they continue to roll in, Brian. And and when I talked to you that night, we weren't able to talk about a lot of this the way I wanted to, because I had some questions for you, but we'll save some of those for a later time. But Brian, you had a Zozo experience you shared with me, and so that really popped my eyebrow up that night when you shared that with me.
Yeah, and I think my audience knows. I'm not sure I talked about that very particular thing, but I did a previous episode of Vestiges After Dark on Ouija boards, where I gave a more extensive view of my personal experience with them and what I think about them and whatnot. But yeah, that I had a circular board made of wood that was built by a witch. I was living in Cape Cod at the time, and at the very, very tip of Cape Cod is a little town called Provincetown, and it's really sort of an eclectic artsy kind of town with a lot of occultism and alternative paths tend to find their way out there. So there's a lot of metaphysical stores and people that are very deeply involved in the occult and witchcraft and whatnot. And so I've always been fascinated with the occult. It's just, I don't know, it's always been a bit of a passion of mine from an academic vantage point mostly, but, just the overall understanding of it really attracted me. So I found a circular board, like I said, that was made by a witch, and I purchased it and took it home and really didn't expect to get any results from it, but really the results were astonishing. It had, I don't remember the exact configuration, but much like the Parker Brothers version, the Z and the O are on opposite ends of the board. And so it would do what you refer to as that rainbow effect. It would keep going back and forth between those two letters. And I would notice that there were two types of things that would happen when we would try to work with this board. Either it would do that when it would get started, or frustrated. Like if you'd ask a question that it didn't want to give you, or you could sense a certain tension in the air when you would ask something and it wasn't giving you an answer, or if it was thinking of an answer, it would do this back and forth to the Z and the O and the Z and the O, and then give the answer. So we just assumed at the time, because you're talking the early 1990s here. This is long before the Zozo phenomenon, and long before your experiences were published out there in that capacity, and so. I mean, there was no knowledge of what that could have been, and I didn't think, oh, look, it's the Zozo demon. It was just doing that motion and then giving an answer. The other thing it would do would be a figure 8. The planchette would move indiscriminately over the board in a figure 8 pattern. And those were the two things that we would notice when things would leave and then come back in. And at the time, I wasn't even really sure there was anything there. It was only after physical manifestations started to occur that I realized, yeah, this is more than just a game or superstition or something of that nature. To the point that even to this day, I kind of cringe when I go into a toy store and see them. In fact, toy stores are becoming far and few between these days because of Amazon and other outlets like Walmart and Target. So you don't really see stores that are devoted exclusively to toys, but our malls still have little small ones. They're not like KB was, or nothing like Toys R Us, but just a little tiny store that has mostly kind of like toys from yesteryear, wooden toys, cars with wooden wheels and that type of thing. And yet, in the midst of all of this stuff, there's this whole wall devoted to the Parker Brothers Ouija board. And that's the only board game they have there. They don't even have Monopoly, and they have the Ouija board. What is this all about? So it is a bit disturbing, for those of us who have worked with it and understand that it is real and it can conjure things of a dark nature. It's a disturbing that this is being marketed as a toy for children, but it is what it is. And, the market is not superstitious, so whatever makes money, they're going to put out there.
That's true, Brian. And I want to let people know that I don't have anything against people that are firm believers that good things can happen through these spirit devices, such as talking boards. I work with other spirit devices, and there's a debate between is there a difference between operating an ITC device that is hands-free on a radio frequency or random noise, random vocal. Are we dealing with the same thing? And I think the answer is I think they're different on my experience level. And so I want people to know that I don't judge people for using a board. I've used them on television. I've recently made the decision not to use them again on television or for any reason whatsoever, because it was kind of like, here's a guy, Darren Evans, that's had all these bad experiences. I've had a lot of criticism because I get back on the board. And so I share some guilt from doing that and, kind of spreading the wrong message. But on Ghost Adventures, they got me back on the board. And strange things happened. That was a crazy episode. None of it was staged. None of it was scripted. My ex-wife was not even supposed to be on the episode until the very last moment, and so it was all just a very, I think that the chaos of that episode really comes through. It's one of the episodes where I can't think of another episode where people reported crazy things while watching it, with animal behavior and things coming off the walls and, that kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of controversy, again, the Ouija board. It harkens us back to a time, where there was a monster under the bed, and yes, do I believe that everybody that has a Ouija session, do I believe that they become haunted, that they become, a target of these dangerous entities, as I call them? No, I think that the reality is that it's a kind of a gamble. It's somebody said one time that messing with a Ouija board is kind of like opening up the door and just letting strangers come into your house. You're going to have good people and you're going to have bad people. But I happen to have had bad experiences, and along with some very funny experiences that I've had. And we used to try to contact dead rock stars. There was one time we tried to contact Bon Scott. It's spelled I mate. Him being from Australia. And so. It's not all doom and gloom, but, throughout my experiences, nothing good has really happened, from the board, with the exception of meeting people like yourself. And I've met, because of my involvement, I've met a lot of cool people. And so I can't say that it's been a mistake, but at the same time, There's been a lot of production companies that have offered me, to be on shows, to use the board, and I've made it very clear that I'm not going to do that any longer. And so, with this new show coming out, they've already, they didn't ask me, they already knew. So that was cool. I'm going to start practicing what I preach when it comes to actual getting on the board, because I don't need to do it no more. I've had enough. And I'm gonna, I'm gonna continue to talk about the dangers that are involved, because in my heart, I know it's true that it can be dangerous, regardless of what side of the fence you sit on. When it comes to these, I think we can all, to a degree, believe that the planet moves and the movement that is facilitated by our subconscious in some manner, and whether or not the spirit world is involved, or we're just talking to archetypes within our own subconscious, it doesn't really change the paranormality of the communication exchange.
No, it doesn't. And honestly, I think even my own students would know where I'm going with this, if any of them are listening right now. In fact, in a lot of ways, that even makes it more dangerous, because archetypes are something that I think we tend to play off as just aspects of the human psyche that don't really have any intrinsic, authenticity. It's basically just patterns of thought or feelings that get built into our DNA and passed on. And to a certain extent, there's some truth to that. However, that being said, archetypes are larger than life. They are, and I like to refer to them as more real than we are, in fact. And the only thing that makes them seem less real is because we tend to cultivate a civilization that focuses on externals and uses in use of the five senses and direct observation as being the only thing that's real. So, the world inside our head, that's kind of like all made up, and the world outside is the real world. And because we can share the outside world and we can both agree on the existence of certain things in the outside world, that tends to take more precedent over the internal world that is more malleable and more private, and and is more subject to things like imagination and even delusion. However, the real danger is the fact that the archetypes themselves are pervasive across all cultures, all around the world, and they're timeless as well. We see the same archetypes playing themselves out in the storytelling of today, just as it was, around campfires, tens of thousands of years ago, going back to primitive man. And so these are very powerful realities that are built into the human psyche and have created a certain symbiosis with us, so that they actually, in many ways, spawn our own behavior. So, whether or not you're talking about something that is like some complete external entity or something that is built somehow within the human psyche is irrelevant, because the fact of the matter is they are still sentient, and whether they live inside you or outside you does not matter to the fact that their sentience is their own. And for all intents and purposes, and any occultist is going to tell you this, you have to treat them as real entities, even though the scientific world might say they're not. Additionally, the fact that they're using your own power, so if it is subconscious movements that we are putting into the planchette, again, irrelevant, because that would still imply that some external sentience, or some, I guess, not external, but independent sentience, is responsible for the content of what is being addressed in the Ouija board session. So in my mind, that's more dangerous than something that would be completely malevolent, but entirely outside of ourselves. Because if it is, you know what I'm saying?
Well, I think we've both touched on a huge aspect of this phenomenon. The fact that when you really look at it, does it really matter if we're talking to something outside of our brain or inside? You know what I mean? They're both equally as dangerous. There's such thing as self-fulfilled prophecy, Brian.
Yeah.
If you go into a Ouija session expecting bad things to happen, then I think you'd agree that would intensify that chance, of something happening, possibly by your own mind's origin, And so when we look at that, in context with Ouija, let's talk about the ideomotor effect. What is the ideomotor effect? Supposedly these subconscious thoughts, they can cause, small impulse movements in our muscles to guide this pointer from letter to letter in some predetermined manner. our fingertips are lightly touching the planchette. And it can't be ruled out that it's scientific fact that there is such thing as the ideomotor effect. However, it cannot account for all the movements of the planchette and the communication exchange. The planchette will race around so quickly that, in my own experiences, I quickly lose track of thought. Someone has to be writing down the letters in a notebook because it's going so fast that I don't even know what it's saying. So the ideomotor effect cannot explain, the information exchanges, particular lengthy conversations, revelations of unknown facts, middle names, dates, locations of lost objects, predictions of future events. It's just not an explanation. And science just wants to say, hey, it's just minor muscle movement. I'm sorry, I disagree. How can the ideomotor how can it spell out words, even slang terms or weird abbreviations that are found, not unlike today's text messaging. There's just so many difficulties with this ideomotor explanation. And so if we can get past whether or not one of the biggest things is, the Ouija controversy is, are we talking to a spirit? Are we talking to ourselves? Let's get past that. And let's realize that it can still be dangerous. And whether it's our own minds manifesting these demons or archetypes, it can still be dangerous.
Well, I think the non-corporeal world, which obviously our experience with it is going to be largely experienced through the mind, because that's the most non-corporeal part of ourself, our nature, and it's honestly where we spend most of our time. It might feel like we're out there in the real world, or what we call the real world, the physical world, but most of us are not. I mean, how much of our lives are basically carried out on autopilot while we go about doing our daily routines without really even paying much attention to it, because we're really lost in our own thoughts and feelings. And that's spiritual. In fact, it's so spiritual that the ancients did not see a distinction between the mind and the spirit. In fact, they were basically the same exact thing. And so a lot of these things that, science might try to come up with as explanations, the ideomotor effect, or whether it be, subconscious reactions, or even communicating with some subconscious part of our own mind, I think misses the point, because perhaps, those that have listened to my past broadcasts would already, have heard me say this before. Perhaps the spiritual world is, and the mind are truly, without any division, the same exact thing. And so why wouldn't we be able to go inside of our minds and be able to connect with all of the resources that we refer to as the spiritual realm, when we're already intrinsically a part of it? And I think, some of the early psychologists or personality theorists kind of understood this better than they do today, where it's taken more of a medical approach. But, when you go, before behaviorists became a thing, and you look at Freud and you look at Jung in particular, there's definite understanding there. Jung was fascinated with divination of all sorts, particularly the I Ching. He spent a lot of time, working with that. And a lot of the primary archetypes that he identified, like the shadow, the trickster, the eternal child, the great mother, are found in tarot. These are, again, pervasive, massive archetypes that are built into our very existence. We're not separate from them. So why would we think for a moment that the spiritual world is in any way separate from us? And Jung referred to that as the collective unconscious, in the sense that all those things, I think in metaphysics or the New Age, people would be more familiar with it as the Akashic records. But, we can connect with that naturally. And so those of us who are very sensitive, or do things like practicing divination or work with the Ouija board, or even study the occult or metaphysics, who are putting our intent into understanding and learning these things, that reality is going to reach out back to us. And you're going to get significant results from it. And so I guess ultimately, to your point there, Darren, and to my own as well, where I think we're in perfect agreement, it doesn't really matter. The scientific explanations don't matter. Even the metaphysical ones don't matter. What matters is this is a means of connecting to an aspect, at the very least, if we want to be very scientific about it, of human nature. And we know, from at least from a religious vantage point, and it doesn't matter if you're Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, human nature has a lot of darkness within it. And if you don't agree with that, just go and look at the world out there right now and tell me that I'm wrong. Because, I mean, all that I ever see when I turn on the news is intrigue and corruption and darkness. So let's remove Satan from the equation altogether. Let's remove demons. Let's forget about Zozo. Let's forget about all of this stuff and just look at human nature itself. If you are able to use a tool like the Ouija board and connect to the deepest recesses of your own mind, believe me, you're going to get all the darkness of hell that you could ever stand right inside there. And so I tell people all the time, don't be afraid of Ouija boards. Be afraid of your own mind. You have
our own minds, Brian. In 1880, what was Dostoevsky? He said that in every man a demon lies hidden.
Yeah.
Aleister Crowley, he said that demons exist. They exist in the human mind.
Mm-hmm.
The demons of rage, the demons of lustful heat, and the screams of the tortured victims. I mean, is Zozo a projection of the darkness that lies within the human soul? We're all capable of committing horrific acts, murder, but only a very small percentage of people ever act out in these ways. But, are there demons inside people or inside our minds that, maybe they push for expression? Do they have the capability of, like this Slender Man and Zozo, do they have the capability of taking on their own external personalities, Brian?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's where we get into, and as an exorcist, we see how possession unfolds. And it always manifests through psychological means. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't external disturbances. This is why we actually do paranormal research, at least in our divisions. The Roman Catholic Church, I don't think, really does as much of this as movies and television would like you to believe. But in our division, in the work that we do in the Nicolaitan Church, we are very much interested in the externalizations, because when a disturbance that is happening to a person internally starts to manifest and bleed out into the phenomenal world, that's when you can take notice and really get a grasp on what these things are. And just like you said, a lot of the times, part of the rite of exorcism is to ask, is to demand the demon give you its name. That's the first step to getting control over it. And, you would expect that it would say, Lucifer or Satan or something like that. But more often than not, you'll get a name like rage or greed or lust. You'll get sort of this overall, again, archetype of the darkness of human nature that comes through in personified form and happens in such a way that the victim has no knowledge at all of the conversation. When they come out of the stupor of the possession, if once the exorcist is able to pull them out, they don't remember it.
But the archetypes, Brian, when you're dealing with the archetypes, I mean, Jung said that they're not so much conscious thought, but more of a predisposition for certain behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
The trickster archetype, potentially unlimited number of tricksters, that they're powerful psychic forces that demand attention. I believe that there's four major archetypes that play significant roles. Our public mask, the face that we present to other people. Then there's the animus, the female and male sides of every psyche, regardless of gender, and the self, the organizing principle. But the significance in the discussion, though, is this shadow, this other side of a person that you mentioned earlier, this shadow archetype, which from what I believe, it's been said that the shadow archetype is you take your darkest thought that you could ever possibly have, and you times that by 1,000, and that's what you are dealing with when you deal with the shadow.
Yeah. And honestly, anybody that would deny that they haven't encountered that is basically either lying or deluding themselves, because if you look deep inside your own psyche, if you really pay attention to your thoughts, you will find your own darkness. We all have it. We all have a dark side. We all have multiple skeletons that we keep locked within our own internal closets. Things that we don't like mentioning, things that we don't even like to think about. And how many times have you gone through life and you had a thought like that, and you have to stop yourself and say, why did I think that? Why would I mean, that I should not be thinking this way, or I should not have had that thought. I don't care how good you are, how religious you are, how saintly you try to be. In fact, the more that you are those things, I think the more that those things are going to start to become known to you, which is what the Desert Fathers wrote consistently about. When you look at those that in the early days of Christianity, when they basically started what became the foundation to Western monasticism, they just went out into the desert and abandoned everything to live alone with God. And they would encounter repeated temptations constantly coming at them over and over and over again. And they wrote massive volumes. In fact, the Philokalia is one of the massive volumes written by these people about their experiences with working against this darkness that was within them. I mean, of course, it would have externalized. We have that ability. We have the power to externalize reactions. And I don't think people fully understand or comprehend just how powerful the human psyche is, because, again, if we want to get a little bit theological here, and I don't try to get too theological on this show. I try not to anyway, but, sometimes the subject matter begs the question. We were created to be creators ourselves. I mean, that's what it means when the Bible says we were made in the image of God. It doesn't mean he looks like us. What it means is we are like his nature. His nature is to create. That's what God does. He creates things, constantly renewing things, taking energy and shaping it into form and creating purpose and function out of those forms. And that's what we are sort of like little tiny, embryonic examples of. We're doing those same things too, only we're not creating universes and galaxies. We're creating art, or we create stories, or, we build buildings if we're inclined to do architecture, whatever it is that we do. Everybody's a creator in some aspect, but we don't really pay attention to the fact that we do have a little bit of that divine nature within us, and we can take that internal thought and project it outwards. And I think the Ouija board, and a lot of the experience people have with Ouija boards, is tapping in ultimately to that aspect of our nature. And if there's a lot of darkness in there, which it is, again, doesn't matter how good you are, we all have it. It's built into the DNA at this point, carryovers from more primal realities. You're going to have to contend.
Jung said, I believe it was Jung, that if for one moment that we look at mankind, as one individual. Jung said that we see that it's like a man carried away by unconscious powers, that these psychic conditions that breed demons inside of us, it seems like they're, just like you said earlier, Brian, they're just as actively at work now as ever in history. Yeah. These demons of the ancient world never disappeared. They have taken on another form, but they've become unconscious psychic forces, so to speak. And are we all capable of being taken over by our own personal demons? Or does the spirit board? And that's where we're getting back to. Regardless if it's an internal or external source, does the spirit board help facilitate the manifestation of dangerous psychic forces?
And I believe it does. I think it does. I think it's a facilitation. I really do. I don't think it provides anything. Just like tarot, people ask me if tarot's dangerous, or they ask me, if astrology is a bad thing for you to do. Of course, they're coming at it from a Christian vantage point, making sure that they're not sinning or something. But the fact of the matter is, they want to know: are these things dangerous? And I always have to come back and tell them, look, tarot cards are pieces of cardboard with little pretty pictures on them. Ouija boards are cut wood with symbols on them, the alphabet. And
Brian, I think people are taking notice, man, because check this out. The Supernatural board, based on the series of, the series Supernatural, when they come out with that Ouija board, Brian, it was missing the letter Z.
Was it?
How crazy is that? And I contacted, some people that were representatives, of this talking board, I believe it was a Hasbro board that came out with it. It's a Supernatural board. If you look at it, it's missing the letter Z, and they said that it was a design flaw. And I started laughing. I'm a designer myself, but if I'm going to design a Ouija board, I'm damn sure not going to leave a letter off of it. This was put in pretty mass, production. And so they're going to tell me that they left the letter Z off this Ouija board just by accident? Come on now.
That's very interesting. Yeah, because, think about the alphabet. That's one of the first things you learn to recite.
Yeah, especially if you're going to make a board. Come on.
Yeah.
I predicted back in 2008 that when I found out that the CEO of Hasbro was going to put a big budget production together involving Ouija boards, I'm like, and this was shortly after the hype of the Zozo phenomenon came out.
Yeah.
I knew right then that here we have, and I'm not trying to talk bad of anybody, but here we have a company that's manufacturing these Ouija boards and saying it's just a game, and then the same owners are making horror movies.
Yeah.
It just seems a little ironic, again, not everybody that uses boards has a bad, connection or a bad experience. And so, Ryan, what are your thoughts on that? That's always kind of been a question of mine that I always deterred around that one. Why is it that certain people can go into a Ouija session their whole lives, and they, and I argue with these people sometimes because I don't deny that they're telling the truth. They go into these sessions and they have all these wonderful conversations about love and sugar and whatever else, and and that's good and fine. I wish it would have happened that way with me. Yeah. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the Ouija board is in the same category. Again, we were talking about tarot and other forms of divination, and let me digress a bit and talk quickly about a story once when, again, back from Cape Cod. Around the same time that I got that Ouija board, I also was exploring tarot. I've actually, I've studied tarot for more than 25, 30 years now. And it's been a very interesting part of my my range of expertise, which I guess a lot of people wouldn't expect a bishop or a Catholic to know much about. But actually, I know. I
love you, Brian. You're one of a kind, my friend.
Well, it's just the way I roll, I guess. But the thing is, I was studying this way back when, and the first time I picked up a tarot deck and tried to do a reading with it, I found that I was writing everything down. I was doing the journal thing from the very first reading. And what I was finding is I was asking these questions, and then I was writing down the answers of what I thought I was getting. And what was coming back after several months or weeks or months or even years of going back and looking at the journal to see if any of that stuff came true, I found that none of it had come true. And all of it was basically what I wanted to be true at the time. I was getting basically a report of my innermost thoughts and feelings, my deepest wishes and desires, but no authenticity. And so I threw them all away. I had a collection of about 30, 40 decks by this point, and I just threw them all away because I said, this is just crap and I don't need it anymore. And it wasn't until I picked it up again, because these things don't just go away. Once you've unlocked some of the power of these things, they come back to you. And I started to take it more seriously probably about 3 or 4 years later. And I wanted to know why it wasn't working. And I found out that it was the way the intent that I put into it was wrong. To make these things work, you can't have any intention whatsoever. You just have to go in completely blank and just give the forces that be the freedom to produce whatever needs to be produced. Now, if you're going to put an intention in, make it your question, but then leave it. Okay, so what I'm finding is
basically the basis of chaos magic.
It basically is. It really is. So what I think tarot and Ouija boards really are mirrors. And so if you go into a Ouija board session with a great amount of trepidation or fear, which most people, let's face it, are, then that's what's going to get reflected back. So that's going to be manifest as an actual sentient being. It becomes a thought form, or what we would call in our work a created demon. So it is a demon in a sense. It's not a fallen angel coming through the board, but it's definitely...
So it's basically an egregore.
An egregore, yes. And actually, egregore would be a perfect term because... you're experiencing it collectively, usually with a group. There's usually 2 or 3 people using a board at one time. It's not typically a person. I mean, I know some people that try to use the board on their own, but most of the time you're going to use it with a partner. So yeah, it's a true egregore. You're using both your power to produce an actual thought form that,
like the Slender Man, like the Phillips experiment.
Exactly. Same exact thing. So it's a mirror. So if you go into it with the fear and expectation that these things produce demons, then demons are what you're going to get out of them. If you go into them with absolutely no, if you think they're just a game and it's just a bunch of nonsense and superstition and you're a very scientific or pragmatic type of thinker, you're probably not going to get any kind of reaction, and it's going to validate exactly what you expected because that's the expectation that gets reflected back. So I think that's really the heart of it. And I think there are some people who just truly do not align very comfortably with darkness. They are naturally light-minded people. And I think Patty Negri is a good example of this type of person because she uses the Ouija board.
Exactly.
Has nothing bad really to say about it. I mean, she does mention that there needs to be caution and, you have to know what you're doing, that type of thing. But she uses it on a regular basis and produces nothing but good results with it. And I think it's because she's just so oriented towards positivity. And that's what she gets reflected back out.
As with Karen Dahlman, there's just a super positive person, and so thanks for, you basically answered the question. And a lot of it depends on your psyche that's going into, you're going into a communication exchange. And there's a lot of people that don't understand that aspect of it. Fear is going to attract fear. Like is drawn unto itself. Most people who encounter Zozo, they assume that the entity is a demon because of course it's, a malicious behavior, the things that come through, and in our culture, most people, they kind of automatically assume that demons are all evil beings working under the direction of Satan. But demons actually fall into a much broader category, and there's so many so-called demonologists out there. That's why I kind of call myself a demonologist, because, I'm not a demonologist. I study the Zozo phenomenon, And so basically a demon is, it's a type of spirit that interferes in the affairs of people. And I think people miss that. The nature of this interference, it varies significantly. As you know, as an exorcist, Brian, the demon basically means replete with wisdom, derived from the Greek term daemon. And the Greek daemons were both good and evil.
Right.
They were considered heroes. And so in ancient times, demons have been blamed for all kinds of problems for humans. Disease, misfortune, health, bad luck. And so, and then if you look at the occult, demons can be summoned and controlled and tasked. And so people always ask me, well, it's not a demon, it's just a thought form, or it's just that. Or, regardless of what kind of label we put on this thing, it exhibits demonic characteristics.
Right.
The sexual promiscuity of it, the stages of oppression, the different levels of Zozo encounters that I describe in my book is not unlike what you see in your experience with cases involving, demonic possession.
Right.
And so there's reasons why I think it's a demon, Brian, and we'll get into this, the next hour, is the actual historic. What does history have to say about it? And so, a lot of these demonic cases that involve communication, the entity starts out in a familiar pattern. In so many Ouija cases, it comes across as your deceased grandmother. It's wise, it's friendly, it's chatty. But then all of a sudden, Brian, it becomes the opposite of what it, represented. It becomes, mean, manipulative. Sometimes there's a total exchange of personalities, and then Zozo starts doing the rainbow effect. You'll notice a totally different intensity in the planchette behavior.
Right.
And this negative entity comes through, and it will even tell you it's been that way the whole time. And by this time, Brian, these victims, because of the facilitation of the board, they undergo a deterioration of whether it be health, mental oppression, nightmares, inability to concentrate. The whole atmosphere of the home can change, and I've seen this in so many cases. The victims feel like they're being watched, by hostile eyes, and they the characteristics of this phenomenon. Zozo has a very similar pattern. A lot of people report that it's, very nice at first, helpful, tells you like it did me that I was a chosen one. And it'll describe itself as, an angel or whatever, a guardian angel many times, but it's masking its true intent. And that's where we get, Zozo is preceded by, an introductory act, friendly sounds that get you hooked, And then when this thing really surfaces, it's got you, it's got you entrenched. By then the oppression has already started,
Yeah. See, and that is, I think, what, this is why we have in our work, we classify, 4 categories of demons. The first of which we only refer to as true demons, which are the fallen angels. But, we have 3 other categories, elementals, which kind of fall into the category of where, you're talking about these other types of, I guess, non-corporeal species of creature, thought forms or created demons, and then wrathful spirits, which are, angry human beings who have died and have not moved on and are continuing their hatred or rage or whatever it is that they are experienced when they were dying. And because the effects that they have on the people that become subject to their attachments are of a demonic nature, have or produce the same level of demonic attack that we would see with even fallen angels. We classify them all as demonic because it has the same characteristics. So when we get back, we're going to, now at the top of the hour, we're going to take a break here. But we're going to talk a little bit about Zozo and what kind of effects, that can have in terms of how it correlates to the nature of the demonic in general. Don't go away.
here in the middle of nowhere. There is no there, it is cold there, but I am safe and I am warm. Although it's hard, I know I gotta keep up, no time to lay, to drift away. I find my space, I spend my time down the rabbit hole again, and as I fall I can feel the pain. You can't tell me where to go, so I don't know, I just go with the flow. I go with the flow. I'm falling up, I'm falling down, from the sky and from the ground. I burn but just like below, and I don't know where I should go. 'Cause I'm stuck in limbo. I'm out of love, but I guess I deserved it. Trying to hide, to pass you by. I'm getting down, feeling fine. I'm light as air, no one can reach me. Lost in a dream, lost in between. Let's keep on flying, let's keep on breathing. I'm falling up, I'm falling down, from the sky and from the ground. I burn but just like below, and I don't know where I should go. 'Cause I'm stuck in limbo. I'm stuck in limbo. 'Cause I'm stuck in limbo.
More than lovers, destined to find one another.
Welcome back, everybody, to this edition of Vestiges After Dark. We are talking with Darren Evans about the Ouija board, his personal experiences with it, as well as the spiritual ramifications, as well as physical, of dealing with one. Some are in the chat room asking, why should we dabble? And we're going to get to some of your questions here when we come back in just a moment. So by all means, start asking away, and we will see what Darren has to say about it. Don't go away. Thank you all for staying with me through this break. Hope you enjoyed the music. Try to get it nice and lively at this time of night so that you're not falling asleep on us. Hopefully the discussion is helping, though, with that. But when we left off, I noticed that there were some interesting questions that we're going through. I can only glance at the chat room, otherwise I get distracted and I can't talk. But Sister Mary Jones, Sister Maximilian, any questions that you'd like to throw out there right now from the first hour?
Oh, yeah, we had a question. Well, the first questions was from Peter. He was asking for any advice on keeping a healthy relationship in your line of paranormal investigation. I'm assuming that was directed towards Darren.
I didn't understand the question. Can you ask it again?
He was asking if there's any advice on keeping a healthy relationship in your line of paranormal investigation. I'm assuming a healthy relationship with your significant other.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, I could tell you that could be problematic. Well, wow, I've been fortunate in this relationship that I'm currently in, that she supports me 100%. She has her own views, but the reason that we met, she saw me on Aftershocks, which was a spin-off of Ghost Adventures. Zach and I were talking about the Zozo phenomena. That's where they get back on there and they kind of retrack everything. And she'd seen me on television and she'd had me on Facebook. Anyway, make a long story short, she's a big fan of Ghost Adventures. She's writing a grimoire. She's a very intelligent young lady, and she just, for whatever reason, she puts up with my stuff. And so, in answering the question, I think it's all about finding the right person. I really believe that Danae and I are twin flames. The circumstances that came down by the way we met, the numbers. I'm a numbers guy with numerology sometimes. I kind of look at the synchronicity of things, and I think you got to get lucky. You got to find the right person that's going to support you and be as emotionally invested in it as I am. And so that's what I've been fortunate that I found that person.
Yeah, it's good advice. I mean, I really do. People ask me all the time about, I've been married to, Tracy, as you guys all know, as Sister Maximilian. She's also a active religious in the order, and we're going on, what is it, 17 years now?
17.
Yeah, 17 years.
Wow.
So they want to know how do you do it? Because this work is very trying. It's very demanding. We both do it now. I mean, she didn't always. She's more recent to this work. But I think she felt called as well. It just came a little bit later. But, and it really is. It's everything that you said, Darren. And it has to be the right person. You can't make it happen. You can't go looking for them. It just, when the right circumstances are in correct alignment, it happens. And that's the only, kind of relationship I would ever want to be in. And that's the beauty of it. And so, yeah, when you're doing this dark work, and it's very similar, as we've been talking about all night, the experiences with the Ouija board, some of the side effects of use are very similar to what we treat in the church in regards to demonic obsession, oppression, possession. We're dealing with it all the time. And it does wear you down, wears on your psyche. It can affect your relationships if you let it. But if you have that deeper connection, if it's meant to be, if God really did see to it, that puts you together, then nothing can really tear that apart. So, yeah, I agree completely. I think that was a wonderful answer, Darren. Any other questions before we move on with the topic tonight?
We had Miss Annette ask if using pendulums are similar to using Ouija boards.
I mean, I'm going to go out there and say, yes, I think it's all very much related. An oracle's an oracle, whether it be a Ouija board, a tarot deck, a pendulum. And certainly people do use pendulums to make contact with the dead or to conjure spirits. So it is absolutely similar. In your experience, Darren, would you say that a Ouija board it has an amplifying effect? Could that be just because of the popular opinion of it, because of the movies like The Exorcist, or do you think there's something else that could be attributed to it?
It would probably move on the order of a maybe a hypnotic dream to a Ouija board to a pendulum to a Ouija board to an automatic writing situation to a deep channeling, a progressive effect. And so the pendulum, basically, unless you've got a pendulum map and you've got it all drawn out in a map form, and it's going to swing in different directions for different meanings, I would say it's definitely a yes or no Ouija.
Yeah. And I've definitely seen some pretty unique experiences. In fact, I've had, in some ways, more profound experiences with the pendulum research that I've done than even with the Ouija board. And the Ouija board is, those that listen to that past episode know, I'm not going to get into it now, it's too involved a story. But those that heard it know it was quite a shocking encounter. So, yeah, I'll have to talk about my pendulum experiences someday. Any other, we'll take one more question and then we'll move on. Any other ones?
Michelle had a question on where to start on books or reading when it relates to spirits and religion.
Oh, my goodness. Well, as far as religion goes, I would say to stick with the fathers of the church. If you're looking at it from a Christian vantage point, the fathers of the church, the Desert Fathers in particular, are really the best places to start. Go directly to the source. Go back as far as you can go. They give great commentary on the Bible. It gives you a better understanding of the ancient teachings that have been entirely lost, it seems, some days when I'm on Twitter and I'm answering questions. And it seems that people have been so far removed from the authenticity of the faith that they don't even really understand what Christianity is anymore. So reading it from the words of the people who gave us this religion is usually the best place to start. So I always recommend the Philokalia. Anything from the Desert Fathers is a great place to start, and the Fathers of the Church as well. Although sometimes they can be a little bit dogmatic, so you have to take it with a grain of salt. And as far as non-Christian, I would say, anything from the Vajrayana school of Buddhism, while it's going to be very complex, because it is a very complex system of philosophy and praxis kind of combined together. Those are great places to really start to explore, the religious side of metaphysics. Now, as far as like ghosts and spirits, I'm going to be probably criticized for this, but there's not really a whole lot out there of much value. And that's largely not because there aren't people writing it. It's because publishers really want to just put out the garbage. And so most of the stuff that you see on the shelves are really watered down gibberish. People that looking to make a quick buck and have their name in print. So, you got to be very careful with that stuff, particularly anything that's going to be found in your New Age section. Now, that doesn't mean there's not good books out there. It's just you have to be really discerning to find them, and know who your author is. Is this somebody that you can trust, or is it just somebody you've never heard about, or is it somebody that is strange things. Darren said he wrote a book. Patty Negri's written a book. I understand very recently. These are people that you can trust. They're people that I will vouch for. I know them personally, and and I can also say Zach's not going to put someone on his show that he doesn't really want on his show, and so. He checks us out, make sure that we know our stuff. So you can look for people like that. What's that?
Oh, I was agreeing with he vets a lot of it. He knows who's coming on his show.
Yeah, he does.
And Patty Negris, Karen Dahlman writes a lot of Ouija stuff. You look at with the recent passing of Lorraine Warren, they've got a bunch of books that they've written. And there's tons of fascinating books throughout history. We're going to get into some of that. But Brian's right. You got to trust the author, because you start reading the wrong stuff, and it's going to steer you the wrong direction. So I would just say, go with what Brian says. Do your homework, and just be a reader with an open mind, and just take it all in, and try to interpret it in your own situations.
Yeah, I will never be one to tell people not to inform themselves or educate themselves or expand their awareness.
And I got to give a plug out, Brian, to as far as excuse me for interrupting, Brian, but as far as the paranormal, I got to recommend Rosemary Ellen Guiley, the co-author of my book. She's written over 60 books of the paranormal, and she's writing them left and right. And she's recently been on the Paranormal. Caught on Camera. She's one of the hosts there. And so just a wealth of information, and a personal friend of mine, Rosemary Ellen Guiley. You can't go wrong.
Awesome. Well, there you go. So hopefully that gives you some place to start. And like I said, I'm never going to criticize anybody for expanding their base of knowledge. I'm a strong advocate of that, and I really do believe that you need to educate yourself about everything, even the darkness. So don't, read in fear, read to educate and understand, and it's true. All of these things are tools. Even the Ouija board is ultimately a tool. It's just a very dangerous one if you're not careful. It's like a gun, you can, I tell people all the time, it's like, you can take a gun out there and you can go and hunt for food and feed your family with it, or you can, I don't know, shoot your own head off if you're not careful. You could leave it out carelessly and your kid could shoot himself with it. Bad things can happen around guns. So there's extra care that's necessary in order to own one and use one responsibly. Same thing with Ouija boards. You're going to shoot your head off with them if you're not careful, if you don't take them seriously. It's not a toy. It's not a game. But Darren, you were talking before the break. We were going to get into some of the history of Zozo, and I know you kind of started on that. I want to make sure that we, went as far as you wanted to go into that arena.
Yeah, I did want to go in there because it's often it's the least talked about aspect of this phenomenon. And people ask me, why are you so hell bent on this being, classifying it as a demon? And there's obvious reasons besides its characteristics of the trickster nature of its personality. But if we look in history, we find a wealth of connections to this strange name, sigil, portal, whatever it is that this thing means, or what it's trying to represent. And so if we look in history, the first thing that I'd found, which was a pretty significant finding in my estimation, and it's found in Apocrypha. The Infernal Dictionary was written in various editions in the 1800s. It's a historical. It's kind of like it's considered a classic work in demonology, written by Simon de Plancy. Mm-hmm. He was basically a demonologist, in the 1800s, and he was interested in the occult, superstitions. He wrote dozens of books about divination, magic, alchemy, sorcery, witchcraft. But his most significant work was the Dictionary Infernal. It was published in his real name in 1818. The dictionary profiles demons and gives them short summaries of notable cases and trials. And basically, we find that Zozo is listed as an actual demon that played a significant role in a French possession case. It involved a young girl in 1816. And according to de Plancy, the case involved 3 demons, one of which was named Zozo, okay? And when I found that out, I actually translated it from French. and it's just a very strange case. And while my critics have looked at this and said, well, that's the only demonic, referenced example, and therefore, they said, well, basically it's not real. Well, it's not up to me to try to explain whether or not this possession case was real or whether it was fabricated. The fact that Zozo is listed as a demon. Now, this came long after my experiences came out, and I was starting to research the phenomenon after I started documenting other people's experiences. And then when I started looking into the occult and looking into these, these old grimoires, there's a name, and there's, whether or not the incident actually happened, here's what bothers me. The fact that it's an actual demon that's listed in history, okay? And so that led me on. I started kind of collecting bones, Brian. Yeah. And over time, these bones, they formed a skeleton, so to speak. Here we have a direct reference to Zozo being of the demonic realm, okay? And so when I found that out, it was just like, okay, well, wow, there's got to be more. There has to be. If it's listed, there's just too many people experiencing it. And then we get into a very interesting, we go back farther in time. There's a remarkable demonic reference to Zozo that's found in a sermon by the Franciscan Saint Bernardino of Siena. Now, he lived in the 1300s. I think he died in 1400 sometime. But Saint Bernardino, he was known as the Apostle of Italy for his travels, throughout the land, and he was known for delivering very stern sermons. Well, he once told a crowd, and people would just flock from everywhere to come see this guy's sermons, and he once told a crowd that he would show them devils, and he shocked everybody by telling them to look at each other because they were doing the work of Satan, And so these were the types of sermons that he would give. Well, anyway, he had mentioned something in one of these sermons, and there was a gambling problem going on at that time, and he referenced in the sermon, documented, he mentioned what he called the Mass of Zozo. It was all talking about this demonic connection, with the gambling world, and he used that as a reference, and he called it, it was translated from Latin as commune omnium daemonum, which means common to all demons. And so he described this Mass of Zozo, this collective Zozo, common to all demons, in his sermon. And so there again, we have a second direct demonic reference in history that describes this thing as an actual demonic entity. Okay. And so that's, that was a pretty significant find that goes back 700 years. And then, looking in the 60s, we find that, there was Alan Vaughan was an author who wrote Patterns of Prophecy, which was a book that was about Ouija boards. I think it was written in 1964. In this book, he describes having a session in which an entity came through and called itself simply Z. And he talks about how this thing got in his mind and almost possessed him. And then, there's also, an alien connection with the Zozo phenomenon that we find in early ufology with George Williamson, who was an early pioneer of ufology. In 1954, he had written a book where he described conversations with an entity through the Ouija board that called itself ZO. And he went on to have even further communication. They developed a Morse code through radio waves, and they extended their communication. This thing claimed to be from outer space and had a warning for mankind that he describes in this book, George Williamson, the early UFO guy. And he talks about how these conversations, how this thing was warning him about evil entities that were coming from other dimensions that were coming after mankind. And so, you start to connect all these dots together, and there's a play that was written in the 60s called Fantasies in the Theater of Jacques. I can't remember his last name, but it references a character in the play whose name was Zozo, and it said that it was an incarnation of the devil, that it was present during Adam and Eve. There is another direct reference to this Zozo, and the thing about it is, it's very disturbing to me how it jumps geographical borders, it jumps cultural borders. In the Melanesian religion, Zozo means walking spirit, and that the spirit has the ability to to conversate with demons and bring them back into the dream form. Then we find a Malaysian children's book that had a very scary creature that would eat humans, and in particular, it was a children eater, and it was called Zozo. We've got the burning of the Zozobra, which, by the way, now, Brian, they call Zozo Fest, is now the burning of the Zozobra. The effigy that's burnt in Arizona every year is now called Zozo Fest. I had talked about the Zozo attraction. Well, let's get into modern history and everything, but you see where this is going. And I just found out today that the PGA has just come out with a new golf event in Japan, a tournament that they're calling Zozo. And so while that may not seem evil, it seems like these corporations are kind of playing with this word because of the Google search rankings of it being, it was the first demonic name that ever trended on Twitter, and so I'm very concerned because of all these pieces in history, all these things, and members of the Talking Board Historical Society saying, well, all these connections are just coincidental. Well, I don't think so. And so, getting into the history, it's there, Brian. And the farther that I dig, the more references that I'm finding to, this thing being connected to the dark realm. And that leads me to another rabbit hole, Brian, is this, this disturbing letter Z. There's a lot of people who don't realize that the letter Z is the least used, letter in the alphabet, as well as it has a very fascinating dark history. Z or Z, it was only in the last 150 years that it would actually become, Z. It was called Zed. It was known in England as Izzard as well. And so William Shakespeare gave a very insultive case to the letter Z, saying he actually called it "thou horse on Zed," which basically means an unpleasant or greatly disliked person back in those terms, a useless bastard, so to speak.
Right.
But throughout history, it seems we don't really know what to do with the letter Z. It was derived from the Greek zeta, but it was actually eliminated, in the early Latin language, eliminated. The letter Z was eliminated from the Latin language because the scholars said that it resembled the rictus of death, that the mere pronunciation of the letter Z would contort the face and make it look not unlike a corpse, the rictus of death, the uncovering of a corpse. And so they really believed that there was something about this letter Z, it being, the seventh letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which basically meant sword or a weapon. And so, we start looking at this, and this is what I kind of find fascinating. And it's like how deep in this rabbit hole do we go? I mean, these entities are choosing this letter Z for whatever reason, and I've actually had to kind of name them Z entities because before there was the Zozo, there was kind of Zaza stories, and this Mama. Who in most of your most vicious Zozo cases, it's like they travel in packs, Brian. These demonic entities, these different personalities that'll show up in these Ouija sessions, and it's not uncommon when Zozo surfaces to kind of have a psychological tug of war with these other entities that come through, in particular the Mama entity, which sounds to me very indicative of an archetype. I believe Mama is one of the archetypes, the Jungian archetypes, and so. It's like it gives us clues, and what I find fascinating in your realm of, in Catholicism, exorcism, knowing the name gives you a power over that demon. But what's weird is again, when the saint referred to it as the mass of, common to all demons, I think that leads us into my current theory that the Zozo is not just one entity. It's kind of like a legion of entities that uses this name to instill fear. And so that would explain how some the sentient or the omnipotent type of characteristic, how can it be in so many places at once? Well, that would explain part of that, is that it's an archetypal legion type of entities that have kind of grasped hold of the collective unconscious in a way, and kind of mirrors itself coming out of humans through the, facilitated by the board. So fascinating history of the letter Z, Brian. It's just crazy how I found that an early Zen priest had written about that there's a certain power, and he calls it that the word Zo was connected to demons in his discipleship, and also another branch of those demons, and I can show you screenshots of this research where it actually says that the other branch of demons is called Mama. Now, how can that be coincidence? when you find something like that that's been in print, that hardly nobody's read, that's from hundreds of years ago, but it's a Zen master that's saying, and he describes, and he's talking to these students, and he's warning them of this state of mind that he called Zo, in which the head, when he sees his students start going in this trance-like state, where he says in this document that the Zo is this, it's demons, the Zo demons. And so when you find stuff like that, I document it, and I'm not asking people to believe that it's connected, but it sure seems to me like it is when here's a guy saying that the word Zo is demons, and that there's another branch of demons called the Mama. Now, how specific can we get? How much coincidence can that be, you know?
Right.
And so, having said that, finding all these connections leads me to the oldest Zozo reference that I found, which was translated from a professor of Asian studies. I had actually found it using other language keywords in language searches on Google. I was able to find a prophecy in Tibetan demonology that, again, was translated by professor of Asian studies. Well, it basically says that that a king would unlock a man from whatever the ninth circle is. They described it as the ninth circle, and that this man would become lord of all demons. And in the prophecy, it says that the man's name is Zozo. And when you read this prophecy, it says that when Zozo is brought forth from this circle and exposed to the world, that it would then signify the end of mankind into what the Tibetans described as the epics, these ages, these cycles of mankind, and that this discovery of Zozo in human form, and that was the first reference that I'd ever found of an entity that was called Zozo that was actually a human, and it goes on to describe that it would become lord of all demons, and that all the demons of the world would grab together with this man, and he himself became a demon, and it signified the end of man. Now, it goes on further, this prophecy, and Brian, it reads like it's ripped out of today's modern headlines, you know? Wow. And I find this stuff to be absolutely insane, but I don't make any of it up. I find it, and I document it, I put it out there, and I let people make their own decisions on what this thing could be based on its history.
Well, it definitely seems to reinforce the archetypal aspect, you know, because as we've discussed in many times, you know, people tend to think that, I mean, if we're talking about the Judeo-Christian demonic entity, which would be a fallen angel, people tend to attribute more power to them than they actually have. They're not godlike. They don't have the ability to be omnipresent. They're not omniscient. They can't read your mind. They can get into your head, but they really can't extract information from it unless you willfully give it. So there's a great deal of limitations. I mean, angels though they might be, and certainly angels do have certain characteristics that are different from human beings in the sense that they can travel very quickly. Time is not really a issue for them, so patience is something that they definitely have in great abundance. They are expert observers, and they will, you know, sometimes watch, fallen angels will watch victims for years to assess weakness and that type of thing. However, they still are not, you know, at the level of God, and even though we tend to be a bit dualistic in our philosophy, even in Christianity today, modern Christianity tends to almost equate the devil as an antithesis of God. He's nothing of a kind. It's just a part of the creation, you know. You know, we're dealing with something that has limitations, and yet we are seeing in this particular case with this Zozo phenomenon that it seems to transcend a lot of those limitations. We're seeing in different parts of history. We're seeing it in manifest in different ways. There seems to have been other encounters in history that relate to exactly the same thing. And how is this happening? And so I'm inclined to think that we are dealing with something potentially that would actually be in the realm of both arenas. Something that is absolutely archetypal, something that's being built in through the archetypal nature, but also something that is quite malevolent, on more of the level of of something that is a creature. So we're talking about what could be a classification of fallen angels that are building itself up through this archetype and using it through history for some type of malevolent ends. And so I'm wondering sometimes, now you talk about the letter Z, I'm wondering if it's not almost the sigil. It definitely has sigil-like characteristics as opposed to the other letters in the alphabet. So I'm wondering if that might be some of it too, that there is some aspect of it that it might even have a conjuration quality to it. What do you think about that?
Well, you say conjuring. Austin Spare was into chaos magic. He was a student of Aleister Crowley. He developed he wrote a book called The Book of the Living Word of Zos, which was a formula for creating sigils or talismans, in what he called an alphabet of desire. And so there's another obvious Zeo reference to something that he called the Zos Kia Cultus, which was his own system of magic. And so these, you mentioned sigils. I've often thought that, just like Jimmy Page's Zoso was considered a sigil, that also the way that these entities use this Zozo, what if Zozo is not an actual, name of a demon, but what if it is a sigil, Brian, that expresses occult forces, that are contained, that has a set of ideas, sacred names, the numerical essence of angels, intelligences, spirits. The term sigil, I believe it comes from sigillum, which basically a Latin term means seal, and so if we use a sigil to call forth spirits, perhaps there's something about this word, as we know that there are words that supposedly have, magic connections, magic meanings, and magical powers. And so, again, what are we dealing with here? And, and although I exposed the phenomenon, never in my dreams would I have guessed that it would gain the notoriety that it has, and I can't say that I don't feel somewhat guilty when people tell me, well, Darren, you've created a monster, you fabricated all this, and it somehow took hold, and you've made all this up, and it's basically took a life of its own. Well, that's another reason why I like to find these things, and it just validates the fact that there's something to this, Brian, that we can't explain.
Yeah.
I think that you've done as good a job or better than myself when you start talking to these archetypes, and your intellect, you have a way of expressing, expression that I don't have, and it's very. I think this is by far the best interview that we've done, that I've been a part of, in regards to the Zozo phenomenon, in that we're able to talk about it on a level that I'm not used to talking. Aside from myself doing other shows where people don't even know what the hell I'm talking about,
Right.
that remain skeptical, that may not have had an experience, and that's what's been really cool. I knew this was going to be a great interview with you, having your background and your intellect with the exorcism. I almost want to ask you to write a book with me.
Sure.
It's been super cool. And I definitely want to write a follow up to my first book. I can't think of another person that I would enjoy writing with as yourself.
Well, I mean that definitely interests me, and I mean it's certainly I people ask me all the time if I've written a book or where can they get my book? They expect that I have one
Sure.
out there. I have written a book. I have, but getting it published. I think it goes over too many publishers' heads. It's just in manuscript form, but a lot of it does deal with a lot of explanations as to the things that you're talking about, and a great deal of it, of course, comes back to the fact that archetypes are not just archetypes. They're not just, again, like we said at the beginning of this show, aspects of the human psyche. Yes, that's one component to it, but there's so much more than that. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. They are more real than we are, okay? And as such, they sort of produce our reality, okay? So I wouldn't give yourself too much grief over maybe pioneering some of this modern perception of Zozo. because it's very likely that the very archetypes that you tapped into would have made you do it anyway. You know, even if you firmly rejected, they would have found a way out, and you wouldn't have entirely known what was happening at the time that I hesitate to call it a seduction, but in a way it is a type of seduction, you know, because that's what they do. They produce effects in the phenomenal world through the instrumentation of the human race, and that's what I call archetypal possession. You know, we tend to forget that there's multiple types of possession. Our psyches are very malleable, and they're really never they're never really the same from one moment to the next. The only time it becomes something that we would refer to as a possession is when it's negative to the point of where we would start to talk about things like possession, because they're such dramatic displays of the phenomena. But, you know, possession's happening all the time. I mean, we're all possessed by the archetypes that we cultivate in our own minds. And these things will transcend us. These things will outlive us. They have been with civilization since the very beginning of creation. They are built into our DNA. Again, something I said at the beginning of the show, and I can't emphasize enough now here. This is the nature of possession, even at the demonic level. There's just archetypes that produce very negative reactions, and those are the ones that we equate to the label of demonic. I think Zozo falls into this category. That's not to suggest that this is not a sentient external being or multiple external beings. It does not. That does not mean this. What it means is the archetype itself can produce these effects. Okay, the archetype is even larger than the angels. They're larger than the demons. Okay, they manifest reality. In fact, I would almost say, and I'm going to get a little too esoteric here, but you know, hopefully most will understand what I'm about to say. Remember, in the book of Genesis, when creation is made manifest, God does this through the words, "Let there be light." And then in the Gospel of John, we get a very esoteric expression of who Jesus is, the Word of God, the Logos. Okay, so the very nature of creation, the very nature of reality, is reflected in Judeo-Christian philosophy as being a product of the Word. As such, Judaism and Christianity are both religions of a book. Okay, Islam sort of is an extension, a distant cousin, I guess, of Judaism and Christianity, and so therefore they are also a religion of the book. They have their Quran. Jews have the Torah, and Christians, of course, have the Gospels, as well as the whole Bible as well. And so the Word is the manifestation of creation. So I would say that what the archetypes essentially are is the living language of God. It's the alphabet of God. And so because God creates both the light and the darkness, I mean, this is very clear in the Old Testament. He says that. He makes that very clear. And we know that Satan himself is a creation. He's a part of creation. He didn't pre-exist with God. He was made by God. And even in the Old Testament, you're going to be hard-pressed to find the devil. You're not going to find him. The devil's not there. What you're going to find is Satan, who is the accuser, sort of like adversary is another term, but he's sort of a devil's advocate. Like literally, that's where it comes from. He sort of presents an alternative possibility, like what we see in the story of Job, where Job's fidelity is tested, and the devil's like, well, I bet you if we do this to him and do that to him, we, as in being part of God's court. Remember, this is not the devil coming out of the pits of hell to wreak havoc. This is somebody that works with God to test men. He's on God's payroll. And understand the reason that this is important is because in Judaism, it would have been completely blasphemous to even imply that there could be another entity out there that could rival God. So anything that would exist in the world had to be subordinate to him and would work under his will. It is only with the advent of Christianity and its influence through Gnosticism, where it picked up a lot of dualistic concepts from Zoroastrianism, as well as other things that were happening in the Middle East at the time, as well as having a very apocalyptic type of theology, that we start to see this larger-than-life kind of devil who can do all of this really nasty stuff and is completely opposed to God. Whereas in Judaism, he works with God. He's doing what God wants him to be doing. That's a very different devil. Yet somehow they got mixed into the same person. And thus we have, Lucifer and the devil everyone's afraid of. But what it really comes down to in the end, let's look at the story of Jesus in the desert, where he's tempted. Right, one of the earliest stories we get on Jesus in the Gospels, he goes out into the desert and he's tempted, and the devil comes to him, and gives him all of the type of manipulative stuff, and of course Jesus, doesn't fall for it, and the devil leaves. But when you really read that story and understand it, how did we come from the Jewish worldview where you had Satan as a part of God's court to test the fidelity of men, to service God in this capacity, not as an evil entity, but as someone who can show the true nature of one, somebody that can get into the heart of a situation. And now we've got this monstrous evil creature. Okay, how do we go from that? How do we take that leap? And I think it's very, very clear. Because, again, getting back into the mysticism of Christianity, the esoteric side that the Roman Catholic Church doesn't want to talk about too much, what we find is that it comes from a very obscure understanding of one of the words, one of the titles that the devil is given, which is Lucifer, okay, which is bearer of light. And sometimes he's referred to also as the morning star. Okay, because Venus was also seen to be related to that. That's sort of the light that Lucifer would bear. And so the morning star is a reference to the devil. We see it in the Old Testament, and it's alluded to in other texts as well. But we also find in the New Testament that same title is reference to Jesus. The morning star rises in your heart, okay? Isn't that a peculiar correlation to have the same title that in one context is being referred to as the devil, in another context is being referred to as Jesus? Well, which one is it? And I think what we are actually getting at, and this is something that is almost heretical to mention, and yet any Christian esotericist is going to be able to tell you this point quite clearly, and a lot of monks in the cloister know this as well. There's a consequence to God becoming man. There's a consequence to taking on human nature, but not taking on sin, because God cannot do this. Cannot take on sin. God can do anything except one thing. He cannot become imperfect. That's not possible. That would be a contradiction. It would be a paradox that cannot be produced. And so, what happens when God becomes man, but doesn't take on the sinful nature? Well, guess what? It has to go somewhere. So that a perfect shadow is created. This is when we start to get Lucifer. It's when Jesus is in the desert. It is basically all of the sinful nature of man that Jesus could not take on upon himself. That's who the devil is. That's who Satan is. And I really do feel that what you get with Zozo is basically an expression of all of that manifesting through a contemporary form. And the Ouija board's the thing now. That's one of the ways in which it can truly come out and reveal itself, because it's when people are taken off guard. They're usually in using it with trepidation or fear. And that's a recipe. That's the only recipe that's necessary to conjure a demon. You don't even need a Ouija board. You can do it just by. People ask me all the time, should I watch Ghost Adventures? Does that make me vulnerable? Will that mean, will bad things happen to me if I watch, paranormal television? And I said, well, my answer is always the same. Well, are you afraid when you watch it? Yes, it scares me. Then you shouldn't watch it, because if you can't do something without fear, you are vulnerable. You are your own Ouija board. You are your own conjuration system. And that's because you are made in the image of God, and that means you are a creator. And if you want to, even if you don't, because you don't know how to control it yet, you can create all sorts of horrific things as well. That's what I think it is. Maybe that's a little too esoteric for some. Maybe it takes a little bit of the mystery away. I don't know. And certainly there's a dark history to it, which comes, again, out of the human psyche and people's experiences with this dark aspect. Don't take this for granted. And I want to make it very clear to everybody, don't think for a moment that this means that it's not something serious. It's more serious than serious, because the human psyche that is untamed, uncontrolled, unprotected, well, you're going to produce worse things than Lucifer on his worst day. Yeah, so I don't know. That's kind of my take on it. For everything that you've shared tonight, Darren, and everything that and there's so much more. I think we kind of, if you're willing, I would love to have you back on for a part 2 of this, because there's just too much to talk about, and 2 hours isn't sufficient.
No, sure. And getting back to the young people, the things that bother me about this phenomenon, about the Ouija phenomenon itself, all these new paranormal shows coming out. Everybody, is very interested, because I do feel we're getting closer. We're getting more evidence. We're getting more gadgets, that we can do outside the board, which I think can lessen some of this dramaticism and dark and gloom that comes through. But thrill seekers, they're looking for a thrill, especially younger people, Brian. They either openly or secretly hope for contact with a scary entity on a board.
Yeah.
And so, now for more than a decade, it's been Zozo that's grabbed most of the fear headlines when it comes to spirit boards. But any board user can, anyone can arbor an anxiety. What if I use a board and something bad happens? Likewise, are they going to project an energy, that can magnetize whatever fear that they have? I think the answer is yes. As we've discussed, this collective thought form or whatever it may be, it comes through when people put their fingers on a planchette, And so, is this thing operating with intelligence? Is it a group thing? And the whole controversy behind the talking board in itself is going to continue to be controversial. But I can tell you this: it's nice to be able to discuss the phenomenon without any type of agenda other than just us telling it like it is. I'm not trying to cause fear. But fear can be a good thing too. Without fear, we wouldn't be, survive as a species. And so, it's that balance of fear, the fear of the unknown, it's always going to be there, and it's from the earliest, ghost worshiping cults, which some say started religion, up until modern times. Where our fear of the unknown is going to, catapult us into this, paranormal world that we find ourselves in now. And so I'd love to come back anytime, man. We talked for 2 or 3 hours and not even scratch the surface of this subject matter. And so, Brian, I want to thank you for what you do and your wealth of knowledge. And in speaking with you, we're able to express this and maybe help people understand a little bit better what they're getting into when they do the Ouija and ITC. It doesn't come without a degree of danger, and that's my whole point. And Dan, I appreciate you having me on. Anybody that wants to see some of my stuff, just Google Darren Evans Paranormal. I've got a blog that I'll write about. There's a lot of stories, there's a lot of things we haven't mentioned, but man, what a great interview to be able to discuss this with an exorcist that I've been on Ghost Adventures with. It hits home to a lot of people. Yeah. You have a lot of fans, Brian, and I got to tell you, I get excited about your future in this business, in what you do. It comes across kind of like me, man. We're very passionate about what we do. We want to help people, and we want to help them understand that there's dangers involved, and hopefully get into some conflict resolution down the road on how we can take care of ourselves and each other.
Well, Darren, that means so much to hear, and thank you so much. And I mean, so much of what you said there, the feeling is very mutual. Remember, I'm going to be out in Vegas in August, and we're going to get together for some Bowmore 18, okay?
Sounds good, man.
Bowmore, I'm sorry, Bowmore 18. It's nectar of the gods. It really is ambrosia. You've had the 17. You've got one on me. I haven't had the 17 yet. That's very hard to find.
It's been great, Brian, man. Just good luck. I know you're going to be on the show again and other shows possibly. With good luck in your endeavors, and may God be with you. And Sister Mary, Tracy, everybody has just been so wonderful and accepting of me and what I have to say, and just you giving me this best interview I've ever done. I want to thank you for that, and just listening to me and helping me to understand parts of this that I feel more better at ease now, and always do after talking to you, bro.
Well, all my love to you, Darren, and I know the audience definitely wants to see you back on and continue this conversation.
Oh, yeah.
So we're definitely going to do that. But we have, unfortunately, reached the end of the show. So I want to say to everybody out there, thank you so much for listening tonight. Thank you so much, Darren, for all of your kind words and all of your wisdom and knowledge that you've shared, your words of caution. It is important, and thank you, Sister Mary Joan and Sister Maximilian, for checking the chat room and getting the questions to us. I really appreciate everybody, and well, I guess we'll have you. Hopefully, we'll have you on before August. But if not, I'll see you in August, Darren.
Okay, Brian, Sister Mary, Tracy, you guys take care. God bless.
God bless, Darren.
Got it. Thanks for a fascinating show, Darren. Appreciate it, bud. Take care.
You betcha. Bye-bye.
God bless everybody, and thank you again for listening tonight. We'll be back probably in probably a couple weeks. So try to do at least one show every 2 weeks. It's a little bit hard to do it weekly still, but we'll keep bringing this programming to you. If you have any topic choices that you would like us to cover, by all means, just tweet it out to us with hashtag Vestiges After Dark so that we can find them. Sister Maximilian is looking, and as well as Sister Kateri, my personal assistant, is always looking for any kind of topics of interest that might cross through the social media. We'll cover them if we can. All right, so we'll. I guess I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Everybody, take care. God bless, and good night.